Ahoy there, mateys! I'm not going to be maintaining this voice for the entire time. But anyway, so all this week you've been learning about pirates, and today is when we kind of put it all together and relate it to psychology. So if we get started, and this is also to kind of show you what my classes will look like when I kind of have a lecturing day. Because as always, since this is a college level class, there are going to be days where it's going to be kind of more of me talking from a PowerPoint. But I try to make those not every single day. I try to make sure that there's activities, but I wanted to give you the kind of college experience. But anyway, so psychology of pirates. And kind of what I first asked you on Monday is I just asked you what you already knew about pirates. And essentially what I heard back from people was what is to be expected. People said, they're individuals that steal from big ships, they steal treasure, they're not very nice. All of the kind of classic stereotypes of pirates. And then when I asked what pirates you know of, most people said either Jack Sparrow, or what was the other one? There was another fictional pirate. Oh, Hook, Captain Hook. Um, I'm trying to remember if anyone gave a name of a pirate other than fictitious ones. But of course, Jack Sparrow from Pirates of the Caribbean was the most common answer, and it's because of these movies, because of media, that our portrayal and our understanding of pirates and how they behaved, how they talked, all of that comes from these media figures. And that's why I wanted to do kind of this lesson on pirates. And so then what you guys learned about is you learned about Blackbeard as an example. Though before I even get into that, you kind of learned some weird facts about pirates first. That was to kind of introduce you to the idea that, these preconceived notions that we have about pirates might not be the most accurate. In fact, they were a lot more progressive than you would have thought. They had the thing known as madalage, which was a legal binding, of two pirates. So if one died, the other one kind of got all the benefits. Which is essentially, I mean, it is what marriage is. Marriage is just a legal binding between two individuals. So if something happens to one, the other one, gets it. Um, and so in a sense, it was kind of the first time that you saw an acceptance of gay marriage was with pirates. Other weird facts is we kind of learned about eye patches. I wanted to talk about that. It talked about in one of the videos that the reason why pirates wore eye patches is that it helped them see in the dark. It should be noted that there is no records of pirates saying that this is why they wore eye patches. This was just a theory that was proposed, and then it was tested out, and it was found to be true. If you ever want to test this, if you are somewhere dark and you're about to go into a bright room, so like if you're getting up in the middle of the night, to go to the bathroom and you have to turn on a light, close one eye, turn on the light, take care of business. When you turn that light back off, open your other eye, and you'll be able to see in the dark much better. So we've tested and we've found that this is true. Whether or not pirates actually did that, though, we don't really know. And then another interesting fact, again, there were a lot in that video, but talking about flags, a lot of times when you think of pirates, you think of, oh yeah, the skull and crossbones, woo. But for seafaring men and pirates alike, it was actually a all red flag, that was far more feared, because it meant that, they weren't going to take any prisoners. Whereas usually with pirates, you'd be surprised, how many, or how few, I should say, actually got killed. But anyway, that goes into the psychology of it, and one of the best pirates of pirate psychology was, of course, Blackbeard. And so I dedicated an entire video about him for you guys to watch. If you have ever been to North Carolina, there is a wonderful island known as Ocracoke, which happened to be the final resting place of Blackbeard. It is a wonderful island filled with history on pirates. I used to go there all the time, family vacations. It's a lot of fun. But anyway, so with Blackbeard, You learn some stuff about him, and essentially his greatest weapon was his intimidation. He was really good at being intimidating, at being scary, at looking scary. They talked about how he would have rolled up kind of hemp or ropes, that they used at the time that he would burn. That, it would just mean that he was surrounded in the smoke as he was flailing around. And it terrified people. And that helped with the psychology of kind of him and his crew, which we're going to get more into. But even with all of this, he looked scary on the outside. When you looked at his actions towards his crew, it was very different. And so you learned about when he took over a slave ship. And he didn't kill or harm any of the slaves. In fact, he took on a lot of them as his crew. And it was reported multiple times that the members on his ship, a lot of them were black and were treated as equals, which again, during this time was unheard of. It was very progressive. And then there was the story about Charleston that I had you listen to, because it is, I think, the 50th anniversary, or it's some sort of anniversary of Charleston this year. And in that, he took hostages, but the only thing he actually wanted was medicine for his crew. And so he didn't harm anyone when he got what he wanted. He released the hostages. And so that sounds a little different from, this scary person, smoke all around him and all that. And so this shows that how he was portrayed, how he was seen, was very different, perhaps, from how he actually was. And that's because of his greatest weapon, his intimidation, his psychological warfare. All right, so what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk a little bit about pirate ethics, and this idea of the pirate code and what that was. Because again, it's been portrayed in Pirates of the Caribbean. It's more like guidelines. What we're going to talk about, kind of some pirate codes, and one in particular. Very briefly, we're going to talk about pirate economics, so kind of how pirates affected money. We're going to look at some psychological techniques. So this idea of classical conditioning, and then this idea of how memory works, and how because of how memory works, and how storytelling was kind of the more common way of news getting around at that time, how that also affected this whole persona of what a pirate was like. And then very, very briefly, I want to talk about pirates today, because there are still pirates, but they look very different from how they did back in the time of which we are talking about. So pirate ethics, the pirate code. Um, this was also known as the Articles of Agreement. And essentially what would happen is you would have this list of rules that the crew had to follow, and you would sign it. Um, and every single member of the crew had to do this, including the captain, and everyone had to agree upon it. And when we look at the rules, you'll see that some of them are very democratic. So I'm going to very quickly bring up a copy of one. There we go. And this is the Articles of Agreement by a pirate known as Bartholomew Roberts, more commonly known as Black Bart, who was a pirate that kind of reigned from 1682, he lived from 1682 to 1722. And I'm not going to read all of them, I'm just going to highlight a few, but these were his actual rules. Like, these were the actual rules that the pirates went by. Like, we have this documented. And so what's in quotes is how it's actually worded, and then, we kind of have a simplified version. And so, ones that might be surprising, well, obviously, don't steal from pirates. But gambling is for landlubbers. So none shall game for money, either with dice or cards. And what this meant is gambling or betting was not allowed on the ship. And this kind of made sense because, you didn't want to cause any sort of disagreements amongst the crew. And, when you have your money and you're, betting against one another, that can kind of rock the boat. So there was absolutely no gambling, which again, this sounds different because in movies like Pirates of the Caribbean, especially on Davy Jones's Locker, you see them gambling all the time. Another one, mind the curfew. The pirate ship had a curfew, and it was 8 o'clock. So the lights and candles shall be put out at 8 at night, and if any of the crew desire to drink after that hour, they shall sit upon the open deck without lights. So essentially, it was the whole idea that, hey, it's late, lights are out, we need our sleep, so in case, we have to take over a ship, we're all ready. Um, you had to have the lights out. And if you were going to be, loud, if you're going to do some drinking, you had to be up deck so you didn't disturb other mates. Again, it doesn't sound like what you would think would happen with pirates based upon the movies that we see where they're, loud and screaming and moving around, all hours of the night. Keep battle ready. Never bring your date home. Stand by your hearties. So he that shall desert the ship or his quarters in the time of battle shall be punished by death or marooning. So kind of the only time that you saw instances of, death or, one of the worst punishments for a pirate was being marooned, though you learned about another form of torture in one of the videos. But it was the whole idea that like you kept a tight crew. You trusted one another, and so if ever you broke that trust, the punishments were harsh. Settle disputes on shore. So essentially what this means is there was no fighting on the boat. If you had a disagreement, which was rare, but if you had a disagreement, it would be done in a gentlemanly manner on shore, not on the boat. The only fighting that took place on the boat is if you were fighting another ship. All right, lose a limb, get workers' comp. So essentially what this one says is if you're part of the crew and you get hurt, like we got your back. You're still gonna get money. You're still gonna be able to survive. And again, during this time, that was unheard of. If you had any sort of other job and you got hurt, you were out of luck. And so this was essentially, the first instance of seeing things like workers' compensation. You get injured, you still get some income. And then, of course, remember, ranks have privileges. So, yes, even though people were treated equally, um, if you were in charge, you got some perks. And give the band a break. So the musicians shall have rest on the Sabbath day only by right, on all other days by favor only. So they had musicians too, because, gotta have your music. And so this is just an example. Again, different crews had different rules, but a lot of them followed a similar guideline. Oh, and then kind of one of the most kind of important ones that make it so democratic and make it so different to the times is the first one that I completely skipped over, rock the vote. Every man shall have an equal vote in affairs of moment. He shall have an equal title to the fresh provisions or strong liquors at any time seized, and shall use them at pleasure unless a scarcity makes it necessary for the common good that a retrenchment may be voted. So essentially what this meant is everyone on the ship was treated equal. It didn't matter your race, didn't matter, anything. Didn't matter if, you'd been injured. You still had a vote. And again, during this time, that was unheard of. It was very democratic. The captains were voted in. They didn't just, take over, which again, you see that all the time in the movies where, one captain, there's a marooning and an uprising and someone takes over. That's not what happened. It was a voting system. So they're very democratic, which, again, unheard of at this time. But that's just an example of the Pirates Code that was used in one of the, whoops, let me just minimize it, for one of the pirates. Because I don't want this video to get too long, Pirate Economics, essentially there's this wonderful book that I have. If anyone's interested, you're free to borrow it. It's called The Invisible Hook. And it just talks about how pirates affected economics and how economics affected pirates. And how, because of the time that they lived in, it was such a good opportunity, essentially, to be a pirate. One little example I'll give is the majority of the time when you were out at sea as, a tradesman or anything like that, it wasn't your boat. You were renting it from someone because you couldn't afford a boat. And so, there was more because you didn't really know who you were renting it from. There was kind of more of this, yeah, you know what, I could just kind of sail off and whereas with pirates, they owned their boat. It was their boat. And so you had more of this feeling of connection, that, you were a part of something. And so it really helped a pirate crew to, have that nice kind of tight commitment to one another. But there's all this other stuff that it talks about in the book. It's really interesting. All right, but psychological techniques. This is the interesting stuff. This is the nitty-gritty stuff. I need to keep figuring out where to put myself. I'll put myself down here. Ah. Okay, psychological techniques. The first one is something known as classical conditioning. We are going to learn about this in a later chapter, but it's this whole idea that you are learning through association. You associate something. So like you see something over and over and over again, and you learn to associate it with something automatically. You don't even think about it. So if I went ba-da-ba-ba-ba, chances are some of you now want fries or a burger, or a chicken sandwich, because that's the jingle from McDonald's, and you hear it over and over and over again until just hearing that sound makes you hungry. That is classical conditioning, and pirates did this, especially Blackbeard. They had a very specific look because, you would see Blackbeard coming, and it even said in one of the videos, they would see Blackbeard, they would see, his boats coming, and they would just forfeit immediately. They would give up because they had associated his look. They would associate his flag with, I don't want to deal with that. So it's essentially a reputation, and it happens automatically. And Blackbeard was so good at classically conditioning people into fearing him, because we've seen that he can be a nice guy to his crew, but people were so scared of him that they would just give up immediately. And oftentimes, no one died. In fact, again, it says in one of the videos that it was never reported that anyone died or was killed because of Blackbeard, and yet so many people feared him. And it was because he classically conditioned people that when they saw his flag coming, they knew that he was coming, and because he was this, scary person with the smoke and, he was nuts, they'd leave him alone. And so that's one of the psychological techniques that's used is classical conditioning. And again, we're going to learn about it way more in class. We're going to practice it more in class. But it just goes to show that like Blackbeard was really good at psychology. Another technique has to do with how our memory works, and also that during the time, because there were individuals that were illiterate, the way that information got told, for, common individuals was through stories. But when we are telling stories, when things aren't written down and we're just recalling them, when we're just, telling a story, they tend to become less accurate the more times you tell them. And part of this has to do with something known as the reconstructive theory, to memory. And it's this whole idea that when you're drawing something from your memory, you're not just recalling it perfectly. It's not like a picture and you're just taking it out. It's not like a file and you're just accessing it. The reconstructive theory for memory is saying that you have to put that memory back together every single time and kind of remember all the different pieces to it and details. And our memory isn't the best. We start to exaggerate the story. And so what would happen is individuals, they'd be caught in this emotional moment. Oh, I should have moved myself. They'd be caught in this emotional moment, this pirate's coming and he has the smoke and stuff and they freak out. And so then when they go, and we all do this, when we go to retell the story, sometimes we play it up a little bit. It's like, oh my God, and he was like 6 feet tall. He looked like a monster. And then his hair was on fire and he was like a demon. And then, they took everybody. I was the last one surviving. Like, they exaggerate the story. And so this is how, again, the reputation of pirates can be blown so much out of proportion because the only information we have on them is the stories that are told. And because of how we know how memory works, they can be exaggerated. And Blackbeard played right into this. He would tell stories about himself. He would play things up. He would love going into taverns and bars and just showing off. He would take gunpowder and mix it in with his rum and drink it so people would say, like, oh my God, he's not human. Like, he'd play it up because he knew that people would want to show off, like, I got to see Blackbeard and, this is what he was like. And people want a good story. And so because of how memory works, it's reconstructing memory, not just recalling it, according to this theory, this helped again to play into why pirates have such a reputation when you look at their actual actions, sometimes it's not as bad. Oops. All right, and then piracy today. This is the last thing, because again, I don't want this video to be too long. So when we look at pirates today, there's kind of two main types of pirates. You have there's been a big increase in difficulty with pirates in Somalia in West Africa, and these are in a sense similar to pirates but different because of the times that we are in. So from 1984 to 2016, there were 7,567 incidents of reported piracy and armed robbery, according to the International Maritime Organization, with 221 of those being in 2016 alone. What makes pirating so different nowadays is, well, one of it is we're armed heavier. Whereas, the pirates that we're talking about that kind of had pistols and swords, now you have guns, and like automatic weapons. And so you see far more casualties, far more violence, with piracy today. And because of that, and there's this article that I'd read about it, you see a lot of PTSD of surviving seafarers. Whereas survivors, as it were, of pirating in the past, a lot of times it just ended up joining the pirates because when compared to how things were, being a pirate was a good opportunity. Again, during those times. Because this is helping to kind of show that while piracy is still a thing today, it's nothing like how it was. And then the other form of piracy is, of course, online piracy. And so this is the stealing or using or copying illegally of software, whether this is music, programs, all sorts of stuff. If it does not belong to you and you did not buy it, you can't copy it and distribute it. And it was found there was some research out there that more than $50 billion is lost each year to piracy. And 40% of software on personal computers is in fact pirated. So it is a huge issue. Some could argue that it's why software is so expensive. It's because since so many people are pirating it, not that many people are buying it. And so for these companies to stay in business, they got to up their prices. So if we were to eliminate piracy, chances are things would be a lot less expensive. But it is a big issue. They are always cracking down on it, trying to beef up security. But that's kind of what we see as pirates today. And I think someone used that as one of their examples. In fact, someone mentioned Somalia in their warm-up when I asked what you knew about pirates, which was wonderful. Though the actual act of piracy is not wonderful. But that is it. And so tomorrow there's, hello Shake, going to be a fun little activity that I really hope that you enjoy on pirates that helps to kind of test your knowledge, but in a fun way. But as far as information goes, that is it for this week and learning about pirates. So I hope you had fun, and I hope you have a lot of fun with tomorrow's activity.